Okay, so now we're going to do this two Ronnies sketch thing where I answer the question you asked me before, which you didn't allow me to answer, and then I will answer that question because you asked about
I'm sorry, Chancellor, but you're at a select committee and I get to ask the questions as a member.
But you
Absolutely. Well, hello then, I do hope you're all well. I do think the only one who's turning this into a two Ronnies sketch is your good self, Jeremy Hunt, with your constant stalling and waffling. That was Siobhain McDonagh, though, Labour MP for Mitcham and Morden, who wasn't going to allow our grinning Hunt to eat into her time to poke holes into his smoke and mirrors budget when it came to childcare. Enjoy.
My outbursts are because I don't know if you appreciate, Chancellor, that most people of all political persuasions, what drives them mad about governments and politicians is big offers and small delivery, smoke and mirrors. And what I want to suggest to you, a lot of your childcare plan is precisely that. When my friends Natasha and Pete were looking at your budget statement, they were delighted. They thought they were going to be helped with childcare for 2-year-old Noah, because that couple pay more in childcare for their 2-year-old than they pay on their mortgage. Only when they looked at the detail, they aren't going to get any extra. And when the Sutton Trust, a charity, as you'll know, that looks at social mobility, looked at your package, 20% of the poorest families were not going to be able to access the 38 hours. And when we look at the numbers of 9-month to 2-year-olds, there'll be 1,369,000 more or less, and only 640 of those would be eligible for the childcare. So there will be more children not eligible. And I was just interested about your timing because, of course, September 2025, when all those children will become eligible to 30 hours, is 2.5 years away, which is conveniently after the next general election. Are you just hopeful you won't have to be there to do it?
Not at all. And we are implementing these childcare plans, which are the biggest increase in childcare provision, I think, in my lifetime. We're implementing these plans as quickly as we can get the market to cope with the additional capacity that will be needed.
I can understand that, Chancellor. But
hang on, you're not letting me...
No, it's my opportunity to ask the questions. Okay. I would accept that if it wasn't the case that 5,400 nurseries closed in 2020-21 and that the amount of money you're giving this year to try and meet the problem that nurseries have in funding the existing free childcare places is only 240 million, when the Women's Budget Group think that you need to spend 1.8 billion, and that well-known Trotskyist organisation, the CBI, think you need to spend 1.6 billion. So how are you boosting that interest, that the industry, the nursery providers, if you are not giving them the money to actually meet the places that now exist? And back to the Women's Budget Group, who we are really grateful to, they tell us in order to bring in your plans for 2025, it's going to cost 9.4 billion, and you're allocating 4.2, so less than half of what they need to keep going.
Okay, so now we're going to do this two Ronnies sketch thing where I answer the question you asked me before, which you didn't allow me to answer, and then I will answer that question because you asked about 2 year.
Sorry, Chancellor, but you're at a select committee, and I get to ask the questions as a member.
But you.
Absolutely. Totally agree with you, Siobhain. And also, the difference between you and the two Ronnies, Mr. Hunt, is the two Ronnies are quite funny. You're not.
You need to allow me to answer them. And you talked about 2-year-old Noah. When Noah turns 3, he will be entitled to 30 hours of free childcare. That was introduced in 2013. If someone becomes pregnant today, by the time their child finishes maternity and paternity leave, they will be entitled to 15 hours of free help. It's not the case that people will only benefit in September of 2025. The first cohort of people will benefit next April, and then there'll be another cohort who benefit next September. And just in terms of you're saying children aren't eligible, let's be absolutely clear. Unless there is someone in the household earning more than £100,000, every household is eligible if both parents are working. Correct. Well, that is the purpose of these reforms. It's to remove the barriers to work for people who want to work. And let me answer your last question just while I'm at it. You talked about support. Hang on.
If you're training to be a nurse or a midwife.
Can I answer your last question? You talked about the support that's going into the sector.
The trouble is, Mr. Hunt, you're not talking to a 5-year-old. She's fully above her briefs and knows it all about it, so she don't need you to talk to her like a 5-year-old.
£5 billion a year. That is a huge amount of additional support that's going up, but we need to build up to it gradually because there are thousands of nursery places.
Pay the bills. And if I thought that this was a sincere effort, I would have thought you'd have a workforce plan. I mean, this is an industry where something like 90,000 people left it since 2018. It's an industry where we rely on very young women to earn £5 an hour. So they are younger, they do not qualify for the minimum living wage, and that's how nurseries get by. So what is the plan to make sure that people want to stay in this industry and care for our children rather than to leave and stack shelves in a supermarket, which is what they're actually doing?
Well, we announced a number of things in the budget to improve the supply of labour to this market, including incentives for childminders and childminder agencies. And we are having a big discussion. The Department for Education is having a big discussion because this is a big delivery challenge, which I know they are determined to rise to. But the simple answer to your question is that we have said to the childcare industry that we're putting £5 billion a year on the table of additional public money into improving childcare provision. We want to work with you to make sure that we can deliver this promise because we think it's very important for the economy and it's going to help thousands of parents to get back to work.
They are saying to you they need twice that to deliver what you're asking them to deliver.
Well, some people said that, but what most people said was that this was an enormous step forward. Some of the campaigners who've been campaigning for this cried when they heard the news because they said this is something that they never imagined they were going to get.
Really? You are so insulting. Wow. They honestly cried. It won't have been with happiness, they'd have cried with despair.
But we believe it is very, very important. So I fully accept there are delivery challenges.
With happiness, Chancellor.
Yes.
I think some of them are crying with tears now because they will not be able to cross-subsidise free places with fully paid for places. And to make up the difference. So I'm sure you get emails, certainly I do, of mums and dads who say, I've had a letter from my nursery, they're closing next week, next month, and for some of them, the next day, because they simply cannot afford to carry on.
Well, there have been nursery closures, but this is a big step in the right direction for all nurseries, and I think anyone reasonably looks at what the government's announced and the money that we're putting behind this enormous expansion of childcare provision can see that we're absolutely serious about transforming the lives for parents up and down the country. With reforms, that will mean up to £6,500 reduction in the childcare costs that people face for a child under 5. That is a big, big step in the right direction.
You need the nurseries and you need the people who want to work in the industry.
And we're prepared to pay for it.
And there seems to be no plan for that at all.
Well, I think, the budget was a couple of weeks ago. The Department for Education now know they have got the funding and they will put in place the plans, and I'm sure you'll hear from them the detail of how we're going to deliver. But yes, we recognise it's a big challenge. That's why we're taking 2.5 years to roll out the plans in full. But that doesn't mean that we're waiting until then. In next year, September of next year, 1 million parents will be benefiting from this package. So that's a big step forward.
The classic case of waffle buzzwords for as long as you possibly can, to eat into these MPs' time for as long as you can, and I totally agree with Siobhain McDonagh. That's what you're at a select committee meeting to do. Answer the questions, not waffle, which we all can tell is what he was doing. Waffling. Buzzwords as well, weren't there? Just out of interest, Mr. Hunt, I just thought myself as I was watching him, do you actually talk to your wife like that? If she sees straight through your waffle. Talk to her like she's a 5-year-old who's just asked, Daddy, where do babies come from? Well, what happens, my dearest? A stork flies over our roof, and then it plops the little baby down the chimney, you know, that little bricky thing in here, and then it comes down. Daddy picks up the baby and puts it in your mummy's belly, and that's where babies come from. So if you do, I think you're a bit of a turd, actually. Now, the reason why Siobhain is cutting you off, well, it seems like to me, is because A, she's onto your game of waffling and the patronising two Ronnies jibe, as I found insulting as well, to someone who is clearly doing what she's there to do, and Mr. Hunt. Also, the second reason, as far as I could tell, is because she was clearly over her briefs, and she doesn't need a complete prat like you to explain something that she clearly understands already, like she's a 5-year-old saying, Daddy, why is the sky blue? I'm not going into that again, but also that ridiculous drivel about people crying with joy for receiving less than half the money required they need to fulfil this project, I find is nothing short of insulting. Who are you trying to kid, Mr. Hunt? But anyways, less of my rant. Oh, I've got to say, if there's ever a man I ever want to either suffer from leprosy or an early death, it's Mr. Hunt. And I don't usually say stuff like that, but I found him incredibly patronising and arrogant. Even more arrogant than I would say of Michael Gove. But anyway, less of my ranting. What do you guys think? Just leave your thoughts down below. Until the next time, I shall bid you farewell and take care, my friends.